Hello, boys and girls. I have been missing you so much. I want to remind you that I think about you a lot and I've been praying for you. And I want to make sure that you are washing your hands lots and lots of soap, lots of washing, lots of rinsing, and that you are working on your papers. You all have packets of papers to do to earn lots and lots of points when we come back to school. I want to tell you that I am visiting with a friend and she doesn't have little children, so she doesn't have very many fun children's books to read. So she found me a couple of books, and one of them, you wouldn't really think that Mrs. Maltby would read you this story, but I think I should. The book is called Mr. Grumpy. What? Mr. Grumpy? Who wants to hear about Mr. Grumpy? Well, I never read this book before, so I thought I would read it to you. It was a lovely summer evening. It's spring right now, but summer's coming next. Mr. Grumpy was relaxing at home. He leaned back in his armchair and he picked up a book. Then do you know what he did? He tore out all of the pages, every one. They flew all over the room. You see, Mr. Grumpy couldn't stand books. He had a very bad temper. In fact, he was probably the most bad-tempered person you had ever met. Grumpy by name and grumpy by nature. Is that somebody you would like to be around? I don't think so. The following morning, Mr. Grumpy was out in his garden pulling up all the flowers. It should have said weeds. You see, he couldn't stand pretty flowers growing in his garden. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw somebody. Let's see who he saw. Who do you think he saw? It was Mr. Happy. Good morning, exclaimed Mr. Happy. Good, cried Mr. Grumpy. What's good about it? But, said Mr. Happy. But nothing, interrupted Mr. Grumpy. Get out of my garden. Look at Mr. Happy. Oh, I bet he has lots of friends. I bet people like to be around him because he is so happy. I beg your pardon, said Mr. Happy. You heard me, snapped Mr. Grumpy. Go away. Honestly, laughed Mr. Happy, you are a bad-tempered fellow, aren't you? Grunted Mr. Grumpy. And Mr. Happy went on, bad-tempered fellows need to change their ways. Change their ways means stop acting that way. Rubbish, grumbled Mr. Grumpy. He stamped into his cottage, stamping right on Mr. Happy's foot on purpose as he passed. Ouch, cried Mr. Happy. Bang went the door of his cottage as Mr. Grumpy slammed it behind him. Look at Mr. Happy. That hurts. Even if you're trying to be happy, if you get hurt, it's kind of hard. Mr. Happy stood there looking, not quite as happy as he normally did. His foot hurt. He stood there thinking and thinking, and he thought some more. Then he had a great idea. He smiled and he went to see Mr. Tickle. Raise your hand if you're ticklish. Say, hee hee. When somebody tickles you, do you laugh? I'm ticklish. Mr. Happy told Mr. Tickle about his idea to get Mr. Grumpy to change his ways. Mr. Tickle grinned a grin that would have stretched from ear to ear if he had ears, which he doesn't. That sounds like fun, he grinned. Let's see what the idea was. That afternoon, Mr. Grumpy went shopping in town. He walked into Mrs. Cookie's bakery first. "Give me a cake," he snapped, "and hurry up." Poor Mrs. Cookie did as she was told. She was afraid of Mr. Grumpy. But as she was handing him the cake, something appeared in the doorway. Do you see anything in that picture that I didn't tell you about yet? Mrs. Cookie looks like a nice lady. I don't think you should talk that way to her. Do you think that was nice? Me either. So something appeared in the doorway. It was a very, very, very long arm belonging to Mr. Tickle. That very, very long arm of his came through the door, across the shop, and tickled Mr. Grumpy. "Ooh!" squealed Mr. Grumpy, dropping his cake. He just couldn't understand what was happening. And do you know what? That same very, very long arm kept following Mr. Grumpy around all day long. It tickled him at Mr. Daly's newsstand. It tickled him in Mrs. Stewart's candy store. It tickled him in Mr. Packett's grocery store. And it tickled him in Mr. Bottle's dairy. Oh, look what happens when he gets tickled. What's he doing? He's dropping everything. Oh no. See what happens next. All afternoon, Mr. Grumpy kept being tickled, dropping his packages and picking them up and being tickled and dropping his packages and picking them up and being tickled again. He couldn't understand why that very, very, very long arm kept following him. He's like, "What?" On his way home, he met Mr. Happy again. "Get out of my way before I kick you," snapped Mr. Grumpy. But just then, that very, very, very long arm appeared and tickled him again. He jumped and his packages went flying again. "I think," Mr. Happy said, "that if you were to change your ways and not be so bad-tempered, this might not happen to you so often." Mr. Grumpy simply grunted like, Everybody said, But on his way home, he did think about what Mr. Happy had said. He didn't like being tickled. Mr. Happy and Mr. Tickle smiled and shook hands. After that day, Mr. Grumpy tried to be nicer, and the more he tried, the less he was tickled by the very, very, very long arm. These days, he's a different kind of person. Why, the other evening, he picked up a book. And guess what? What do you think? He's probably not quite as smart as you guys, so he probably didn't read it. Let's see what he did. He only tore out one of the pages. The end. So I think if we could say something to Mr. Grumpy, what do you think we would say in our class? Oh, Mr. Grumpy, you need to, say it with me, make the choice to rejoice. Even when things are not going our way and we are not feeling very happy some days, we can make the choice to rejoice. When you guys choose in your heart to say, you know what, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to look for the things to be thankful for, and I will make the choice to rejoice. Let's say that together. I will make the choice to rejoice. Thank you, boys and girls, for listening. I have some few more books, and we're going to come on and do some numbers and some math things in a little bit. But I love you and I miss you, and every day make the choice to rejoice. It helps your day go so much better, even if things are not going your way. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you again soon. Love you and good.